Alice slowly opened her eyes, feeling an intense, cold light invade her field of vision. The environment around him was strangely familiar, but at the same time, confusing. The smell of disinfectant and the constant sound of electronic monitors echoed in her ears, creating a symphony that made her feel out of place. What had happened? Why was it there? She tried to move, but her body felt heavy and limp. A slight tremor ran through his hands, and that was when the memories began to return. Flashbacks of laughter at exquisite dinners, luxurious trips, and moments of affection with Eduardo, her husband, appeared in her mind. But these images were quickly overshadowed by a shadow, a feeling that something was very wrong. Alice tried hard to remember, but all she managed was a haze of confusion. Then he heard voices. "I don't know how much longer I can bear this," said a low, anguished male voice. It was Eduardo. Alice felt a wave of contradictory feelings when she heard his voice. Love, anger, distrust. He was there, but what was happening? What did he mean with this? "I really don't know if I could live without her, but the inheritance. It's an absurd amount. And as soon as she leaves, this fortune will be mine," Eduardo continued, without realizing that Alice was awake. Those words cut like a knife, and Alice felt her heart race. Heritage. Leave. What was he saying? Desperation began to take over her as she tried to move her lips, but only a faint sound escaped. Eduardo turned around abruptly, his eyes widening when he saw that his wife was awake. Alice, however, was not ready for the shock that followed. "Alice, you're awake." He ran to her, relief written all over his face, but Alice wasn't convinced. Eduardo's expression quickly changed from concern to a forced smile, and that made her even more alert. "Eduardo, what did you say? What's going on?" His voice was broken. Each word felt like a monumental effort, but the urgency to know the truth drove her. "You had an accident, honey. A coma, but now you're here, and that's all that matters." He held her hand tightly, but Alice felt the coldness in his touch. Something wasn't right. "Let's just focus on your recovery. You need to rest." She looked into his eyes, searching for answers, but Eduardo's expression was an enigma. Alice tried to remember what had happened, but her memories were fragmented. "The inheritance. You talked about inheritance. What did you mean by that?" Eduardo hesitated, tension growing between them. "It was a desperate moment, Alice. I was just worried about what might happen if you didn't wake up." "Don't think about that now. The important thing is that you're alive." His words seemed like a distant echo, an attempt to divert the topic. Alice was not fooled. Something was definitely wrong. The idea that her husband could be thinking about money while she was fighting for her life sickened her. What else was he hiding? "Eduardo, I need to know the truth. What do you really think about me? What do you want?" Alice was determined not to let herself be carried away by the fragility of her condition. The strength she had cultivated in years of life was resurfacing, and she was willing to fight. "Alice, please, don't do this to me now." He looked away, and Alice realized there was something more there. A shadow of regret? Fear? That intrigued her. Eduardo had always been a controlling man, but now there was a chink in his armor. "Let's talk about this later, when you're better." "I don't want to wait. I need to know if I can trust you." Alice's voice rose a little, and Eduardo seemed to feel trapped. He looked out the window, as if looking for a way out. "Trust? Alice, you know I've always been here for you, don't you?" He turned his gaze to her, but there was a hesitation that didn't go unnoticed. Alice felt invaded by a whirlwind of emotions, but the determination to discover the truth guided her. "If you really cared, you wouldn't be talking about inheritance while I was in a coma." The words came out with a weight she hadn't expected, but the truth needed to be told. "What else are you hiding from me, Eduardo?" He took a deep breath, and Alice saw the conflict in his eyes. "It's not what you think. I just want to protect you." The sincerity in his voice seemed real, but the distrust that had settled in his heart was stronger. "Protect? Or protect yourself?" Alice felt like the conversation was turning into a game of hide and seek, but now she was determined to find the answers. "I want to know what's really going on. Don't treat me like a child, Eduardo." He seemed surprised by her intensity. "Alice, calm down. I don't want you to stress. The doctor said you need to rest." "I don't want to rest. I want answers." His voice echoed through the room, and Eduardo recoiled, as if he had been punched. Alice felt bad for a moment, but the urgency in her mind didn't allow her to back down. Okay. I'll tell you what I know, but you need to calm down." He looked around, as if to make sure no one else was around. "The inheritance is big, yes. And there are people who are keeping an eye on it. But don't think I'm involved in anything bad. I love you, Alice." "Love? Is this how you show your love? Talking about inheritance and how your life will be better after I'm gone." Her words were full of emotion, and Alice saw Eduardo's expression change. He seemed to be getting lost in his own thoughts, and that made her even more alert. "Alice, listen. I just got desperate. I didn't mean what I said. It was a moment of weakness." He held her hands, but Alice was no longer sure she could trust him. Every word sounded like an attempt to divert attention. "Desperation? Or do you have a plan?" Alice remembered stories she would hear about cheating, about men who cheated on their wives for money. A wave of despair invaded her. "Eduardo, I need to know. Are you thinking about leaving me? About killing me?" He looked at her, and for a brief moment Alice saw a glimmer of truth in his eyes. "No, Alice. I would never do that. I just need some time to think." "Time to think about what? How are you going to deal with the inheritance? How are you going to live your life without me?" Her tone was accusatory, and Alice knew she was asking dangerous questions, but she needed to know. The truth was all that mattered now. Eduardo walked away, and his expression was panicked. "It's not that. I just want you to be okay. That's all that matters." He seemed to be losing his composure, and Alice realized that she was getting closer and closer to discovering something that could change everything. "Then tell me the truth, Eduardo. What are you really thinking?" The intensity of the question hung in the air like a storm about to break out. Alice was ready for whatever came, determined to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. Alice was in a state of alertness and confusion, still recovering from the anesthesia that had kept her in a coma for so long. After hearing Eduardo talk about his imminent inheritance, curiosity and distrust began to intertwine in his mind. As the hospital became a labyrinth of fragmented memories, Eduardo's voice echoed in his thoughts like an unsettling mantra. The soft sound of the heart monitor next to her beat in a rhythm that seemed to match her heart, speeding up with each revelation that emerged. It was then that a seemingly casual conversation caught his attention. Eduardo was on the phone in the hospital corridor, his voice low, but Alice managed to catch some words that echoed through the room. She strained to listen, leaning slightly on the bed, her curiosity piqued. "Yes, Raquel, tomorrow is the day. We need to be discreet. I can't let Alice find out. The inheritance will be ours, finally. After everything is over, we will be able to live as we always dreamed." Alice's heart skipped a beat. Raquel. Who was this woman? And the mention of an inheritance? Eduardo was talking about his plans for the future, a future that didn't include her. Alice found herself overcome by a wave of anger and betrayal. The image of Eduardo, who until then was seen as the love of his life, now turned into a treacherous shadow. Determined to uncover the truth, Alice knew she needed help. His mind quickly turned to Luana, his childhood friend, who had always been a source of support and loyalty. Alice was sure that Luana would help her uncover Eduardo's dark plans. With considerable effort, she pressed the button next to the bed, requesting the nurse's presence. When the nurse entered the room, Alice said, her tone firm but without revealing the urgency she felt, "Can you help me contact my friend, Luana? I need to talk to her." The nurse, noticing the gravity in Alice's voice, nodded. "Of course, ma'am. I'll get your phone. One moment, please." While waiting, Alice got lost in her thoughts, wondering what Eduardo could be up to. The idea of being a mere pawn in a game in which he had complete control left her distressed. When the nurse returned and handed over the phone, Alice quickly dialed Luana's number, her mind buzzing with questions and plans. "Alice? It's good to hear your voice. How are you?" Luana's voice was like a balm for the soul, but Alice didn't have time for trivial conversations. "Luana, I need you. Is it urgent? Eduardo, he's up to something, and I need to know what's going on." Her voice trembled with emotion, but Alice forced herself to remain firm. "Calm down, Alice. What did you hear?" Luana sounded worried. "He spoke on the phone with someone called Raquel. He mentioned a secret meeting and plans for an inheritance. I don't know what that means, but I feel like my life is at risk." Alice felt a knot form in her stomach. "My God, Alice. I'm going to help you. You need to get out of this place and find out the truth. We can follow Eduardo and see what he is doing." The determination in Luana's voice encouraged her. "Yes, let's do it. When he leaves, we will follow." Alice said goodbye to Luana, feeling a new sense of purpose. The idea of facing Eduardo and discovering his intentions filled her with adrenaline. The next morning, the sun shone brightly, illuminating the hospital and bringing new energy. Alice, now with a plan in mind, dressed carefully, opting for a simple dress that made her look like an ordinary patient. When Eduardo showed up, she was ready. He wouldn't suspect anything, Alice thought, as she watched her husband prepare to leave. "I'm going for a walk, Alice. If you need anything, just call the nurse," Eduardo said, while taking the car keys. "Sure, honey. Enjoy," Alice replied, trying to keep her voice neutral as her heart pounded with anxiety. As soon as Eduardo left the room, Alice quickly turned around and sent a message to Luana. "He left. Let's go after him," Alice typed, sending the message with a mix of nervousness and anticipation. It was only a few minutes until Luana arrived at the hospital, with a determined look and an expression of solidarity. "Ready for this?" Luana asked, holding Alice's hand, as if she knew her friend needed support. "I am." "Let's find out what Eduardo is hiding." Alice took a deep breath, feeling a wave of courage envelope her as the two left the hospital and got into Luana's car. The sun was shining brightly, and the journey to where Eduardo had gone seemed to take an eternity. Alice and Luana exchanged meaningful looks, each absorbing the gravity of the situation. City traffic seemed slower than ever, each traffic light dragging. Finally, Luana parked on a street close to the restaurant that Eduardo often frequented. "Let's hide there, behind that bush. This way we can see everything without being noticed," suggested Luana, pointing to a strategic corner that provided a good view of the place. Alice nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. The two positioned themselves behind the bush, watching the movement at the restaurant's entrance. After a few minutes of waiting, Alice saw Eduardo approaching, accompanied by a woman he didn't recognize. His look was one of joy, and the way he leaned into her showed that there was an intimacy that Alice never imagined existed. "It's her, Raquel," Alice murmured, feeling a wave of conflicting emotions. What would she do now? They were about to discover the truth, but the pain of betrayal hit her like a wave. Luana, noticing her friend's anguish, shook her hand. "We are here to find out the truth, Alice. Don't forget that," she whispered, trying to provide comfort. The two watched the meeting, paying attention to every word and gesture. Eduardo and Raquel entered the restaurant, and Alice felt that her life was about to change forever. She didn't know what she would find, but she was determined to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. After all, the life he had known was about to be dismantled, and what was left of it needed to be rebuilt based on truth and courage. Alice and Luana settled into a discreet table in the chic restaurant, whose walls were adorned with contemporary artwork and whose tables were covered with crisp white tablecloths. The environment exuded sophistication, and the soft playing of a piano in the background created an almost ethereal atmosphere. Alice, still recovering from the effects of her coma, was nervous, but her determination kept her going. Luana, in turn, seemed like a rock by his side, with her attentive gaze and unshakable confidence. "He'll be here any moment," whispered Luana, looking at the watch on her wrist. "Are you ready for this?" Alice took a deep breath, feeling her heart accelerate. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I have no choice. I need to know what he's planning." The thought of hearing Eduardo discuss his treacherous plans made her uneasy, but the need for justice outweighed her fear. Finally, Eduardo entered the restaurant, dressed in a dark suit that gave him an imposing appearance. Alice felt butterflies in her stomach when she saw him, the memories of happy moments together now distant, overshadowed by the betrayal that she was beginning to unravel. At his side, Raquel, Eduardo's lover, was an attractive woman with long, wavy hair and a seductive smile. Alice watched as Eduardo greeted her with a kiss on the cheek, and the pain in her chest intensified. "Look at them," Alice murmured, her tone thick with bitterness. "He looks so happy." "Don't let yourself get discouraged, Alice. You need to listen to what they have to say," Luana replied, holding her friend's hand in a gesture of support. "That's what we're here for." Alice nodded, trying to concentrate on the words that would echo between the tables in the restaurant. Eduardo and Raquel sat at a table in the back, where they were partially hidden by the soft lighting. Alice leaned forward, trying hard to catch every word. "I can't believe you had the courage to bring me here," Eduardo said, looking at Raquel with a sparkle in his eyes. "Even more so with everything that's going on. What if Alice wakes up? What if she finds out?" "She won't wake up," Raquel replied, laughing softly. "And even if you woke up, you already have everything planned, don't you? Once she is out of the way, the entire inheritance will be yours." Alice's heart skipped a beat. Raquel's words sounded like a blow, and the reality of what she was hearing hit her full force. How could he do this?" Alice muttered, her face white as the tablecloth. "You need to calm down, Alice." "Let's hear more," Luana insisted, maintaining her composure. Alice closed her eyes for a moment, seeking the strength she needed to continue. His life was at stake, and every word could be the key to his survival. "You don't need to worry about anything, my love," Eduardo continued, taking Raquel's hand in a possessive gesture. "Once Alice is out of the picture, we can live the life we always dreamed of. No more secrets, no more lies. Just the two of us." "But what if someone finds out? What if she has some proof?" "Do you know what she was like before all this?" Raquel asked, a tone of concern in her voice. "People might start asking questions." "I've already thought about all of this," Eduardo assured, his voice firm. "It's only a matter of time. I will make sure everything goes as planned. Alice doesn't stand a chance against me. She doesn't even know what's going on around her. And when the time comes, I will get rid of her. The inheritance will be mine, and then we can move forward without looking back." Alice felt a lump form in her throat. Eduardo's words hit her with the force of a gale. He was, in fact, planning to murder her. All the love she once felt for him was now a distant memory, replaced by a wave of anger and despair. She looked at Luana, who was wide-eyed, processing the gravity of the situation. "We need to get out of here," Alice whispered, her voice shaking. "I can't listen to this anymore. We need to do something." "Calm down, Alice. We need to be strategic. If you leave now, Eduardo may become suspicious. We need evidence, something that can be used against him, Luana replied, trying to stay focused. Alice nodded, swallowing hard. She knew that Luana was right. They needed a plan, something that could unmask Eduardo before it was too late. She watched as Eduardo and Raquel laughed and exchanged caresses, a spectacle of betrayal that made her feel powerless. "They look so happy," Alice said, her voice breaking. "How can he be so cruel?" "He doesn't care about you, Alice. He only cares about what he can gain. But you can't let him win. You need to be smarter than him," Luana encouraged, shaking her friend's hand. "We'll figure it out." Alice took a deep breath, trying to control the storm of emotions that dominated her. "You are right. I can't let him think he won. I will fight for my life." Time passed, and the conversation between Eduardo and Raquel continued, full of plans and promises of a future that did not include Alice. With each word, the pain turned into determination. Alice knew she needed to act, but how? While Eduardo talked about what they would do with the inheritance, Alice began to formulate a plan. "Luana, we need to find out everything about this heritage. If Eduardo is so confident he's going to stay with her, there's something he doesn't know," Alice said, with a new sparkle in her eyes. "Yes, we can investigate this. We can speak to a lawyer, someone who can help us understand the situation. And, if necessary, we can do this anonymously," Luana suggested, already thinking about the possibilities. "What if he finds out? What if he catches us?" Alice inquired, anxiety beginning to invade her heart again. "We will not let that happen. We need to be cunning, stay one step ahead of him." "You will stand up and fight," Luana encouraged, as Alice looked at her gratefully. "I'm not going to let him win. Not now. Not after all this," Alice declared, her voice firm and determined. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Alice and Luana stood up, preparing to leave the restaurant. Alice took one last look at Eduardo and Raquel, the scene recording itself in her mind. She knew she was just beginning the battle, but now she had a clear goal, not just survive, but unmask the man she once loved. And, with Luana's help, she was determined to regain control of her life. Alice sat in her hospital bed, the soft morning light filtering through the curtains, while the sounds of the heart monitor pulsed like a constant reminder of her fragility. After recent events, Alice's mind was in turmoil. She had heard Eduardo's treacherous plans and was determined not to be a passive victim. Now, more than ever, she needed a plan. Luana had arrived at the hospital early in the morning. The childhood friend was an invaluable ally, always willing to dive into the depths of injustice alongside Alice. Upon entering the room, Luana found Alice with a serious expression, her eyes shining with renewed determination. "Alice, what are you thinking?" Luana asked, pulling up a chair and sitting next to the bed. "I can't stay here. If Eduardo knows that I'm awake and conscious, he won't hesitate to act," Alice replied, her voice firm, although it still carried traces of weakness. "We need to find a way to get me out of here and investigate this inheritance he so desires." Luana nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Alice continued, "I don't know exactly what Eduardo knows about the inheritance, but what I heard was enough to scare me. He's willing to kill me to get everything. We need to figure out how this works." "What did you find about inheritance?" Luana took a deep breath, remembering the research she had carried out. "I spoke to some lawyers and made a survey of the properties that Eduardo has in your name. Apparently, he will not only inherit a significant sum, but also valuable properties. It's possible that he made plans to transfer everything to Raquel, his lover," said Luana, worried but determined. Alice flinched, feeling the weight of betrayal. The idea of Eduardo, her husband, planning her death and a future with another woman was frightening. But at the same time, it motivated her to act. "We need a plan," said Alice, her voice now stronger. "I can't let him win. Let's make Eduardo believe that I'm vulnerable, but at the same time, we need to collect evidence. I will confront him, but I need time and a plan. Luana smiled, admiring her friend's renewed strength. So let's start. What do you suggest? First, I need to leave this hospital. Then, we have to investigate more about Eduardo's inheritance and properties. He could be hiding things, Alice explained, her eyes shining with new ambition. Can you find out if there is any documentation that proves his intention to kill me? Something that could incriminate him? I'll do my best, said Luana, already starting to mentally plan how she could access information and documents. How about you? What will you do when you leave here? I will do whatever is necessary. I will prepare for the confrontation. But before that, I need to know what he really planned, Alice replied, her heart racing with the idea of finally facing Eduardo. The two friends spent the rest of the morning discussing strategies and tactics. Alice remembered small details of the life she shared with Eduardo, moments that now seemed distant and distorted, as if she were watching a movie. But one thing was Alice. The trust she had in him had completely shattered. When Luana got up to leave, Alice felt a mixture of gratitude and anxiety. I'll make some calls and see what I can find out. Stay calm and don't let Eduardo see that you're planning something, okay? Alice nodded, a tight smile on her lips. Thank you, Luana. I don't know what I would do without you. You are stronger than you know, Alice. Remember that, Luana said, before leaving the room, leaving Alice alone with her thoughts. Alone, Alice began to think about her plans. The hospital now felt like a prison, but she knew she needed to be patient. The idea of leaving the hospital and coming across Eduardo made her nervous, but the determination to avoid the dark fate he had planned for her was even stronger. Hours passed, and Alice decided it was time to act. She began making small notes on a pad she had found next to the bed, writing down everything she remembered about Eduardo, his routines, and the details that could be useful for her investigation. Every word was a way of taking back his power. That night, as the hospital fell asleep, Alice made a more detailed plan. She thought about how she could disguise herself and leave without being noticed. The desire for freedom and justice pulsed through his veins. With each passing moment, she felt more alive and more determined. The next morning, Luana returned, bringing a series of information that she had managed to gather during the night. Alice, you won't believe what I found, said Luana, with a sparkle in her eyes. I spoke to a friend who works at the registry office. There are property records and some strange transactions that Eduardo recently made. Alice leaned forward, her attention focused on Luana. What exactly did you discover? He transferred some assets to Raquel's name. And there is also a life insurance contract that he took out in his name, which has a strange clause, Luana revealed, her eyes wide. What does this clause say? Alice asked, controlling the anxiety that was growing inside her. If you pass away, he will receive a huge sum. You need to see this, Alice. This could be the key to unmasking him. Alice felt a chill run down her spine. The betrayal was deeper than she imagined. We need to act quickly. If I don't do anything, he might decide it's time to eliminate the problem, Alice said, her voice now firm. I can't let that happen. Then let's go, Luana replied, determined. The plan is simple. You pretend to be in recovery, but in reality, we start collecting evidence and investigating all of this. Alice nodded, adrenaline coursing through her veins. And when I confront Eduardo, I want him to know that I know everything. I want him to feel like he's losing control. He needs to understand that I'm not easy prey. The two women spent the afternoon coming up with the plan. Alice felt a mixture of fear and excitement. The game was intensifying, and she was about to enter the most important battle of her life. As night fell, Alice looked out the hospital window, watching the city lights. In his heart, a fiery determination was growing. She was ready to fight for what was hers, not just for her life, but for her freedom and dignity. And, with Luana's help, she was closer to revealing the truth that Eduardo tried so hard to hide. With each passing day, Alice became stronger, more determined. The future was uncertain, but one thing was Alice. She would not be at the mercy of her husband's treacherous plans. The battle was just beginning. Alice, with adrenaline pumping through her veins, looked at the white ceiling of the hospital room, imagining what life would be like outside there. Freedom was so close and, at the same time, so far away. After weeks of meticulously crafted plans, she was finally about to leave that place that had become a prison. The sunny day that filtered through the window seemed to promise new possibilities, but Alice knew that the biggest one would be facing Eduardo and unmasking his treacherous intentions. With the help of Luana, who was always by her side, Alice had achieved a simple but effective disguise. A brown wig and sunglasses were enough to alter her appearance enough for no one to recognize her. The plan was simple. Leave the hospital, go to the house he shared with Eduardo and look for concrete evidence of his betrayals. If everything went well, she would have the evidence needed to expose him at the party he had planned to celebrate his new life with Raquel. The moment Alice got up from the bed, her heart skipped a beat. Fear and excitement mixed together, but she took a deep breath and moved on. When leaving the room, he looked around, ensuring that there were no nurses or doctors nearby. Every step he took towards the exit felt like a small triumph. Finally, the hospital's revolving door opened to the outside world, and Alice felt the cool breeze caress her face. It was as if he was being reborn. The house she shared with Eduardo was just a few blocks away, and Alice decided to walk, feeling the need to soak up every moment of her newfound freedom. Along the way, she couldn't help but think about the conversations she had overheard, the broken promises, and the betrayal that had left her so devastated. But now, with renewed determination, she was willing to fight for her truths. When she got home, butterflies invaded her stomach. The residence, which was once a home full of smiles and promises, now seemed like a battlefield. Alice entered through the back door, which she knew was unlocked. The silence inside the house enveloped her, and every step she took echoed in her ears. The first thing he did was check that no one was home. Eduardo had an appointment, and Raquel probably wouldn't be around. Thus, Alice began her search. The dining table drawers were the first to be searched. Papers and documents were scattered around, but nothing that caught his attention. Alice went to the office, where she knew Eduardo usually kept important documents. With her hands shaking with anticipation, she opened her closet and began rummaging through the papers. The smell of old wood enveloped her, and with every leaf she looked at, her heart beat faster. "Alice, you can do it," she whispered to herself, trying hard to stay calm. What I was looking for was more than just evidence. It was his life, his dignity, and his freedom. After a few minutes of searching, something in a brown folder caught his eye. Alice pulled it out and, upon opening it, found documents that left her paralyzed. There were contracts, emails, and even messages exchanged between Eduardo and Raquel, where they discussed detailed plans on how to get rid of her. Alice's stomach turned as she read the words that, before, were just suspicions, but now became a cruel reality. "He really planned to kill me," Alice said aloud, in a mix of disbelief and anger. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she angrily wiped them away. This was no time to weaken. With the evidence in hand, she knew she had to act quickly. Every second counted. Once she finished reviewing the documents, Alice took everything and put it in her bag. With a plan in mind, she called Luana. Her friend's voice sounded relieved on the other end of the line. "Alice, did you manage to get out? Where are you?" Luana asked, concern showing in her voice. "I'm home, Luana, and you won't believe what I found. I have concrete proof." "We need to meet now," Alice said, trying to remain calm. "I am on my way." "Where can we meet?" Luana replied, her voice now full of determination. "Let's meet at the coffee shop on the corner." "I'll stay at the back, where it's safer," Alice suggested. "Understood. I'll be there in 10 minutes," Luana concluded, and Alice hung up, knowing that her friend would do everything she could to help her. With her heart racing, Alice left the house and walked to the cafe. With every step, his mind raced with what he had just discovered. Eduardo was about to become a murderer, and she needed to stop him before it was too late. The idea of exposing him during the party was risky, but it was also the only way to ensure he didn't get away with it. Upon arriving at the cafe, Alice saw Luana at a table in the back. The friend was nervous, looking around as if afraid that Eduardo might appear at any moment. When Alice approached, Luana greeted her with a tight hug. "My God, Alice! Are you okay?" Luana asked, watching her friend with concern. "I am, but we have more important things to discuss," Alice replied, pulling the documents out of her bag and placing them on the table. Luana looked at the papers, looking over the texts. With each line he read, his face became paler. "This is insane. Did he really plan all this?" "Yes." He and Raquel were discussing the details. "They thought they could eliminate me and keep the inheritance. We need to do something, Luana. We need to expose him at the party," Alice said, with fiery determination in her voice. "But what if he finds out what you're doing?" "This could be dangerous," Luana warned, her expression worried. "I know, but we can't let him get away with it. He needs to be stopped, and this party will be our chance." "Let's come up with a plan so everyone knows who he really is," Alice replied, her voice firm. Luana nodded, and together they began to draw up a plan. Eduardo's party would be the perfect stage for the revelation. Alice knew she had to prepare for the confrontation, but now she felt like she had a real ally by her side. With each idea that emerged, Alice's confidence grew. She was no longer alone. "I was ready to fight." As the sun began to set, Alice and Luana said goodbye, sure that the next step towards the truth was closer than ever. Alice looked back one last time before leaving the coffee shop, determined to get her life and dignity back. The fight was just beginning, and she was ready to face it. The party's loud music and flashing lights enveloped the room in an air of celebration, but to Alice, every note sounded like a war drum. She was in the center of the room, surrounded by guests laughing and clinking glasses of champagne, while the vision of Eduardo, her husband, consumed her. Wearing an elegant red dress that highlighted her curves, every detail of her appearance was a carefully laid trap. Alice had planned that moment coldly, and now she was about to unmask Eduardo in front of everyone. Luana was a few steps away, her eyes wide and her breathing quickened, as if she could feel the growing tension. Alice shot her a quick glance, a silent signal that it was time to act. With her heart pounding, she took a deep breath and began to make her way through the guests, her unwavering determination reflected in her gaze. "Eduardo, we need to talk," Alice said, her voice sounding firm despite the commotion around her. The authoritarian tone attracted the attention of those present, who began to stop their conversations to listen. Eduardo, who was laughing with a group of friends, hesitated for a moment, but soon recovered. "Of course, dear. What's so urgent?" He forced a smile, but Alice saw the uneasiness in his eyes. She knew he was aware of what was about to happen. "It's about you and Raquel," Alice declared, her eyes fixed on his. Silence fell like a weight on the room, and murmurs began to arise among the guests, who exchanged curious glances. "I know about your plans, Eduardo. I know you are plotting my death to get the inheritance." Eduardo's laughter died down, and his face turned pale. He tried to hide his surprise with a nervous smile. "What do you mean, Alice? You're delirious." "Everyone here knows we've been together for years," he replied, but the hesitation in his voice gave away his guilt. "Together?" Alice laughed humorlessly, the irony of the situation not escaping her. "Do you think everyone here is aware of your betrayal? Or what did you actually plan? Do you think I would stay in a coma and let you replace me just like that?" She gestured dramatically, attracting even more attention from the guests. The murmurs intensified, and Alice began to slowly walk around the room, as if she were on a stage, each step bringing her closer to her truth.
I heard everything, Eduardo.
His phone calls, his conversations with Raquel. I can't believe you thought I wouldn't wake up and find out how much you really despise me. Eduardo, now Alicely nervous, tried to change tactics. Alice, this is not what it seems. I love you. This is just a phase we all go through. Let's talk privately, okay? He pulled her by the arm, but Alice freed herself, her eyes fixed on Eduardo's. Talk in private? Alice repeated, her voice rising in pitch. Do you really think you're going to get out of this? No. Not while everyone is listening. I'm no longer the woman you left in a coma. I am Alice, and I am here to claim my place. At that moment, a lawyer entered the room, a man of medium height with a leather briefcase under his arm. He seemed out of place in the festive atmosphere, but his presence soon attracted everyone's attention. Alice recognized the family lawyer, a man who remained in the shadows, always discreet, but who was now the key to the revelation that would change everything. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, raising his voice to be heard. "Alice, you must know that there is important information about your heritage that has been kept secret." A murmur of curiosity passed through the room. Eduardo frowned. Alice worried. "What are you doing here? This is no time for discussions of inheritance." "Actually, it's the perfect time," the lawyer replied, ignoring Eduardo. He turned to Alice. "I have come here to inform you that you are the true heir to a fortune significantly greater than you realize." The documents that Eduardo tried to hide were finally revealed. The shock was palpable. Alice felt her heart speed up, but a wave of relief washed over her. The truth she sought was about to be exposed. "Eduardo, did you really think you could kill me and keep all of this? Not only have you underestimated my will to live, but your greed blinds you. Now, what are you going to do?" Eduardo, now desperate, began to argue. "You don't understand, Alice. I did it for us. For our lives, for our future. You never knew what it was like to live in poverty, but I did what was necessary." "Necessary?" Alice approached, her gaze penetrating. "You were willing to kill me for money. That's not love, Eduardo. This is treason. And now, with this new information, I have the power to reverse all of this. You will no longer control my life." The lawyer, sensing the growing tension, intervened. "Alice, I recommend you consider your options. With this inheritance, you can not only free yourself from Eduardo, but also prosecute him for attempted murder." The guests were in a state of shock, some murmuring amongst themselves, others looking at Alice in awe. The room, once full of laughter and celebration, now transformed into an impromptu courtroom, where Alice was the judge of her own life. "So, Eduardo," Alice said, raising her head with dignity, "you can try to argue whatever you want, but the truth is no longer yours alone. I will use this fortune to ensure that you pay for everything you have done. And as for Raquel, well, I hope she is prepared for the truth that will reach her too." Eduardo, now speechless, realized that he had dug his own grave. He was surrounded, not only by the guests, but also by his own lies. Alice took a step back, a satisfied smile forming on her lips. "I'm free, Eduardo. And now I have control of my life," she said, her firm voice resounding in the room. "And you, well, you'll just be a reminder of what I no longer want in my life." The party, which had begun as a celebration of the future that Eduardo had dreamed of, became a milestone in Alice's liberation. She looked around, seeing looks of support and understanding from her friends and acquaintances, who applauded her courage. As Eduardo walked away, defeated, Alice felt a surge of power and freedom. Not only had she reclaimed her life, but she had also gained the strength she needed to move forward, without the chains of betrayal that held her back. And with a new future in front of her, Alice smiled, satisfied, finally free to live the life she had always deserved. Did you enjoy today's story? Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and hit the bell to not miss our upcoming stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.